What's up, Bombshells? Welcome to Bombshell 1111 Podcast, Therapy for Women of Color. My name is Kia, and I'm your host. Generally, podcasts request donations, but I want you to show love by simply subscribing to my social media platforms by visiting my website at www.bombshell1111podcast.com. I want to see thousands of subscribers on this platform. Leave your comments and I'll show love by shouting you out on my social media platforms such as Instagram and Facebook. I want to thank you for your continued support as always. And with that being said, let's jump into this new episode.
Hi, I'm Karen Vincent. I'm a certified coach and a licensed therapist, and I'm here to drop some bombs with Bombshell 111.
Welcome back, Bombshells. I'm Kia, and I'm your host. Tonight, we'll be discussing rewiring your brain with our special guest, Karen. So without further ado, Bombshells, let's get into it. Welcome, Karen. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you on. As I told you before we got started tonight, this is something that I personally, in my own personal journey, been working on as well. So I'm just so excited to hear the things that you're about to share here tonight. So welcome and thank you again, Karen, so much.
Thank you.
So Karen, I will have the bio down below in the description box about who you are, what you do, where you're from. But I would like for you, as I do with all my guests, to start off with just giving a short description about who you are, what you do, where you're from, Karen.
Great. Yes. So again, I'm Karen Vincent, and I am here in the U.S. on the East Coast, and I'm a certified life coach and also a licensed therapist. And I have my own coaching business called Karen Vincent Solutions. And I work with people on a lot of different areas. But what has been so interesting to me in doing this work is that it almost always comes back to the brain, the mindset, the worries, the what if thinking, all the ways that the internal thinking processes hold us back in achieving all that we want in our lives. So inevitably, we always kind of focus on cleaning up the stuff that's going on in the brain and making sure that our brains are working for us instead of against us.
Oh, wow. I love it. Love it. So, Karen, how can we rewire our brain to promote mental and physical well-being? Tell us about it.
Such a great question and such an important question. So, back, however, 50, 100 years ago, we just kind of thought that the way our brains are the way our brains are, and that, they develop and evolve through childhood and then they're just kind of fixed. And what science has shown us improvement over and over again is that what we think about the most and what we put the most attention on gets the most activity in the brain. And so with that, we create wiring in the brain as well as neural pathways in the brain. So if you're always thinking about what's going wrong, the challenges, all the ways that something could fall apart, your brain starts to think about that more and more and more. And then with that, obviously comes certain feelings. So what we think creates our feelings. And then if you think like kind of doom and gloom or nothing's ever going to go your way, you're going to take very different actions than if you intentionally focused on, what if things went great? What if I could do this? What if I was meant to, do XYZ or worthy of XYZ? When you think like that, you create a whole different set of wiring in your brain, which creates different neural pathways, which would create different feelings and probably different actions. So that's just kind of a very high level summary that I think highlights that we have more control than we think, but so often we just kind of leave our brains unsupervised, and unsupervised, they can really kind of run off the rails on their own. So in the work that I do, I really work with clients to get them to understand what are the soundtracks kind of playing in their minds, and are they working for them or are they working against them? And if they're working against them, we start to change that by intentionally thinking different thoughts, focusing on different things. And if you're like me in the Northeast of the US, we get snow. And if you think about if a fresh coat of snow fell overnight, let's say a foot of snow, and you walked straight out your door, you would create kind of a pathway. But if somebody else looked out your front door behind you, they might kind of say like, was that an animal? Was that like a gust of wind? But if you went down that path 100 times, it would be a no-brainer. The person behind you would go right behind you down that path. And if you think of that like a neural pathway in your brain, the more you think in a certain way, the more clearly defined that path becomes. And then the more easy it is for similar thoughts to roll down that same path. So when we want to talk about kind of rewiring our brain, we're intentionally like kind of going out that front door, but taking a slight right turn so that we start to create a different path with different intentional thoughts that over time, picture it keeps snowing, the old path starts to fill up and the new path you just keep paving. And so that over time becomes the new default thinking pattern.
And so, Karen, you kind of went right into my next question. So that was a good segue right into this. Give us an example or a scenario. Well, when you've been working with a client or assisted a client in this process, what does that look like? Or what did you do? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, great. So a good example would be someone that I've worked with in the past, and I'll do everything I can to protect any identity, but who had a lot of negative thinking about what other people thought about them. And so it probably started somewhere in childhood where maybe legitimately they were made fun of or something, they're bullied, kids can be kids sometimes, but then that thought kept perpetuating and they were reinforcing that thought themselves and thinking, this person doesn't like me. This person would never want to be friends with me. This person doesn't think I'm good at my job. And so when I talk about that like kind of neural pathway and dialing up the way things are firing, the more this person had that internal conversation with themselves, the more they were reinforcing that negative thought pattern, which then created lots of feelings of insecurity, self-doubt, and they were really holding themselves back in their lives. And so what we did was we intentionally started thinking about, okay, challenging that. Like, is there actual evidence that this person doesn't think you can do your job? Is there actual evidence that this person would not want to be friends with you? And they started to challenge those faulty, what we call like thought distortions or faulty thinking patterns, and start creating different ones. And you can't go from 0 to 100. So you can't go from saying like, I don't think I'm worthy to everyone loves me so much. Your brains will kind of freak out and call you a liar, but you come up with like the next best thought. So in this process, she came up with, there's no reason these people wouldn't like me. So she didn't say they love me, they want to be my best friend, but like, there's no reason these people wouldn't like me. There's no reason anybody would think I'm not qualified to do this job. And then intentionally doing that. And then the next step was, when you leave work, identify one thing that you did really well that day. When you have an interaction with someone, identify one way that interaction was really positive for both of you. And so you just keep generating that firing, and it's not fake. It's not like false positivity. It's based on actual facts. And then you start to kind of build that new pathway where you go out the door and you go slightly right. And so she was really able to get to a very different place around her self-esteem. And what's so interesting about our brains is there was some story that developed in her childhood, and the only thing perpetuating it was coming from inside her. There was nobody telling her any of this stuff. She was just letting that play on kind of the repeat list without checking in on it. So it was kind of like detangling it and then rebuilding it to a more accurate a more accurate presentation of how people in the world were actually interacting with her and thinking about her.
And so, Karen, as you've already stated at the beginning of this podcast, one of the best ways to rewire our brains is to distract it. But what are some other things or some other ways that we can help rewire our brains?
Yeah, great question. So it really is looking at first, it's like, what is the problem? Where do you think your brain is not working for you? And then what can kind of counter that? So for example, I kind of just gave this one example and then I'll expand on it. If someone's having like imposter syndrome about their career and thinking like, am I really good enough? Am I really qualified to be here? It's getting actual evidence that says otherwise and challenging that belief that may not be based in anything factual. So saying, if there were 10 other people here, would they agree that I am not qualified to be doing my job? Is there actually any evidence that somebody has like approached me with to say that I'm not qualified to do my job? And then when you leave work every day, you give yourself 1 to 3 reminders of what made you qualified to do your job that day. So it's like these little snippets of things. If someone feels like I'm not worthy of love, same thing. Like, what's one thing that you can love about yourself? What's one thing that somebody else has told you positive about you? What's one thing that you would offer another human being in a relationship? So you start to it's literally like taking the flashlight, the spotlight, and changing what you focus on to be more in alignment with what you want to be thinking, which then again creates how you feel, and it significantly changes the actions you take in your life.
Now,
Did that answer your question?
Yes, definitely. And that kind of goes, you're doing a great job going into my segue questions. Okay, so Karen, I know that we're going to talk about some of the concrete strategies that you use within your practice, but can you tell us about any known or any maybe therapies that you have suggested or used within your own practice to help rewire the brain?
Yes. So definitely cognitive behavioral therapy is I think kind of the backbone to doing this, because it really is about, how our thoughts just influence what we see. Two people could be standing and experiencing the same thing, but what they think about it can significantly change the experience.
Yeah.
And so I think the pandemic is a great example, since we all kind of experienced that. There were people who were like petrified. There were people who were, on their couch for months, just kind of miserable and overwhelmed. And there were other people who said, thank God I get to have dinner with my kids every night. I don't have to commute 2 hours each way to work. Same thing happening, but the interpretation completely changed the feelings that people experience. So it's really looking at what we're thinking and how it influences how we're feeling, and then the actions that we take in our lives, which ultimately create the lives we live.
Oh, I love that. And that's so accurate. So accurate, Karen. So Karen, let's just go ahead and jump right into, tell us about the concrete strategies that you use to help change individuals' brains so that they work for themselves.
Yeah, great. So there's a lot of different avenues to take. The first thing that I think always has to happen is, and this sounds like it's a little bit off to the side, but it is directly connected, is we have to manage our nervous systems, because when we get stressed out or anxious, worried, fearful, whatever that might be, our nervous systems rev up. And when they rev up, that emotional side of our brain gets really loud and goes to like all like the worst case scenario situations or the what ifs, or really latches on to like the hard things. And the logical side of our brain, which always processes information slower, kind of just shuts down and even gets silenced. So one of the first things, if you're looking at kind of thinking about changing your thinking patterns, is to make sure that you're in a calm state. And you can get there through lots of different strategies. Slow breaths is one of the easiest, quickest ways, because you always have your breath with you. And there's lots of different breathing strategies. So, a slow inhale for 4, pause for a count of 5, a slow exhale for a count of 6 is a good one. Or breathe in for 4, pause for 4, exhale for 4, pause for 4, and just keep repeating that is also a good one. So that's kind of step 1 if there's any concerns about that. And then kind of what I touched upon a little bit already, I think, is the best way. And it's to first, you have to get clear on what am I thinking that's causing me to feel a certain way. And that might be journal it out. Just dump your brain on paper. What am I thinking? And once you get clear on that, and I always say pen and paper is the best because you're not distracted by technology. You're not worried about, did I make a typo or something like that? Like, you just dump your brain on paper, and then you can kind of zoom out and look at it as almost an observer instead of the person living it, and say, like, is this serving me? And if it's not, what could I believe instead? Or what could I think instead? But you have to believe it. So like, that's kind of when I said, like, don't stretch it too far. Like, what's the next best thing I can believe? Mm-hmm. And then you intentionally think that thought. And maybe you put a reminder in your phone, you set some alarms, and every time the alarm goes off, you think that new thought. You have a sticky note, you have something on your mirror, so that you're intentionally doing it. And that, again, is like you're having things fire in your brain differently because you're taking control of it. And then it's like you're going out the door and going to the right. And when you do that, it's like these small snippets of consistency. When you do that consistently, it starts to become the default thinking pattern instead of the old faulty thinking pattern being the default thinking pattern.
Karen, thank you so much. You are letting me know I'm on the right path.
You got it.
I have affirmations on the mirror. I've most recently, in the past couple of years, in my own personal life, did what you just said, start journaling more, things like that. And, even watching these self-help videos and reading books and things of that nature, they state exactly what you just said. Thinking a new thought, having a sticky note there. So when you're thinking a negative thought, you have that opposing thought there, that positive thought there on paper, and repeating that in repetition, in addition to also doing that breathing technique. I read a lot about that, so I definitely appreciate that.
Yeah. And I think to kind of what you just said, that like affirmations are great, that the key is you have to connect with them. You want to have that emotional connectivity with them, but also if there's any opportunity, and I know that depending on the season of life people are in, this isn't always possible, but if there's any possibility to take even 5 minutes for yourself in the morning to kind of just check in on your brain, that can make a big difference. Mm-hmm. Versus you wake up late, you're rushing through a snooze alarm, you're running, and you're frazzled from the get-go. That nervous system is revved up, and that brain will take off on its own. Mm-hmm. So any opportunity to kind of check in with yourself and get things how you want them to be to start the day will always work in your favor.
And you know what, Karen, real quick before we get out of here tonight, I never really understood that until I got like later in life, and later in age in life, the importance of like the many things that our brain does. Like it's a machine. It's literally a machine. It's a tape recorder, and it what we tell it. And I never knew that, until I got like later in life. And it's exactly what you're saying. You have to just be mindful of the things that you're pouring into yourself. Even simple as watching things on television, the music that you listen to. You need to be mindful of that, So I agree with everything you said here tonight. Karen, do you feel that there's anything that I missed that you would like to share with the listening audience?
No, I mean, I think I like what you just said too about like what you consume and how it influences you. Mm-hmm. There's so many people that, I talked to somebody today, and she said, when I don't feel well, I know there are things that make me feel better, but I get on TikTok and I feel worse. And so like, again, just recognizing like what does that input do to your brain and your thought patterns? and just don't let it run off on its own. You said, your brain is like a computer. And I think like the physical structure of the brain itself is like the hardware, but the software is the programming. And if we're not the software programmers, other things are going to influence the programming of our brains. So we just need to check in on it, take back control, supervise it a little bit, make sure it's programmed right, and make it, like I said, work for us and not against us.
And Karen, and thank you for that. Karen, how can the listening audience get connected to you for your services or just for more information?
Yeah, so my company is Karen Vincent Solutions. So I have a website and you can see my coaching packages there. I'm on Instagram at Karen Vincent Solutions as well as on Facebook. And I'm mostly on Instagram, and we talked about mantras and affirmations, and part of what I do in my Instagram stories every day is share like an affirmation of the day in case it inspires people to kind of take it and use it as their own. So feel free to come join me over there.
And Karen, and another thing, your services, are they provided in person, online? Tell us about that before you get out of here tonight.
Great. They are all online. I do Zoom video coaching. Sessions are 45 minutes, and I'm pretty flexible. I don't, require people come weekly. It's really like, how do we get the momentum you need? And then how do we make sure there's enough time in between sessions so you can practice some of these skills and come back and we just keep fine tuning them. So I have a couple different packages, and it's great. I love my clients, and they're people who really want to kind of just take control of their brains, take control of their lives, have achieve their goals and get the habits and systems in place to get them from where they are now to where they want to be.
Thank you so much for that, Karen. And thank you so much for coming on and being part of the podcast tonight.
Thank you. It was so great to be here. I really appreciate it.
You're more than welcome. And Karen, I just want to say one last thing before we get out of here. Is there any piece of advice that you want to leave with the listening audience?
I think my biggest piece of advice is like, if something's not feeling right for you, if you're like walking around with feelings that don't feel good, or you're not satisfied with how things are, don't accept it. You can change things in your life. Change is always possible. We're designed to grow and evolve and change. So you can probably do it on your own. You can get support if you need to, but don't accept feeling a way that you don't want to feel. You're worth more than that, and you're certainly capable of getting yourself to a place where you feel better.
Thank you for that, Karen. And you guys, that brings us to the end of this episode. Thanks to Karen for joining us. We hope that you were able to hear something that was beneficial to you. And with that being said, thanks for listening. And always remember, you are a bomb within your own shell. Peace, love, and light, you guys. Until next time, good night. If you enjoyed this podcast, please make sure you subscribe so you're notified when a new episode is posted. Rate, review, and share this podcast with your family and friends. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you're leaving with some valuable information that can help you on your personal journey. Also, check us out on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram at Bombshell1111 or at Bombshell1111 TV. You can also check out our mental health page, Your Health is Your Wealth, on Facebook, which is a page created to inform and support individuals with mental health and other health conditions. And with that being said, always remember, you guys, you are a bomb within your own shell. And until next time, peace, love, and light.